Let's go. Hey, lots of new faces here tonight. So, who's first time here at the Azure Group? Yeah, welcome. So, come along all the time. Go over the place. It's all good. We haven't really started yet. So, free beer and pizza every time you come. So, hopefully that's an incentive. Come along. So, all the new guys, welcome. Ray, for you. We're great to see you again.
all those new people. If on your way out, I'll collect the membership fees.
Nice try. Let's go. All right. So, welcome everyone. So glad that you could all come along. So very soon we're going to have a great presentation from Todd. So Todd, for those of you who are new or who haven't seen a bunch of the old ones, Todd's a regular. He comes along, he does some, I shouldn't ham it up too much, should I? Or should I? I don't know. Yeah, he does great presentations. We love it. Temper the bar, okay. Oh, go back and watch some of the old ones. They're on YouTube. Is that better? Anyway, so tonight we're going to explore model context protocol in Azure and what Azure can provide to assist you on that journey. Todd is an experienced Azure consultant, solution architect with a focus on AI applications, cloud native, app modernization, integration, developer productivity. Recently moved on from, I'm allowed to say it. Yes. Recently moved on from Microsoft. So Todd's always had some great things to share about all of his work at Microsoft, which has been fantastic. Yeah, so welcome, Todd. It's great to see you back here. Hello. Clicker is taking too long.
You're criticizing my.
I didn't realise the delay. I apologise.
It's your animation.
My animations don't take that long. Anyway, so this is being recorded. These microphones are really good at picking up all of the conversations. So please have as many personal conversations as you can. It's going in YouTube. It's going to be great. So that will be awesome. We're all here tonight for the Brisbane Azure User Group. If you're here for something else, sorry. But otherwise, we're going to hear a whole bunch of what's happened. And there's been, I don't know, 1 or 2 new things happen this month. And that does have the right month in it. So that's pretty good of me to actually update that. You're here for June. If it's not for June's group, well, I'm sorry. But before we get on to all the detail, we've got a big thank you out there to our sponsors. So without these guys, none of this would be possible. So the Codify chip in for the pizza and the beer, they're awesome, and Microsoft the venue. Come in, guys, grab a seat. If you can. There's some cubes there too. Maybe that would work. Yeah. So big thank you out there to our sponsors, so Codify and Microsoft. Thank you very much. They're awesome. So we've had these sponsors for a long time and they do a great job. So if anyone knows of any need around the place to have some consulting, Codify will definitely help you out in the Azure space. And yeah, Microsoft is providing Azure, so that's great. So this is a community event and we would love to hear from anybody. And it's just your experiences in Azure. Well, ideally Azure, we kind of want to keep it on topic. So it doesn't have to be an amazing latest thing. We also really get value out of, what are some of the long-term products Microsoft's using and what are the things that are adding the most value to your organization. So that really helps as well. So if anyone has any desire to come along and stand up and give a presentation, it doesn't have to be a full-length one. We can pair you up with a couple of people. Let us know. So we've got an email address there. Drop us a line. Or yeah, that's the best way, honestly, that email address. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to, anybody's welcome to come up and talk. It'd be great. So a few updates. This thing happened, which is an awful lot of things, awful lot of little things too, by the way. And I've got my top 5. I didn't put that slide in. My top 5 in 10 pages. so maybe it's not 5. I don't know. Depends how you count. These things are always great. AI Foundry. Who's heard of AI Foundry? Yeah, people? Who'd like to hear more about AI Foundry? Not as many people. That's interesting. Yeah, okay. So AI Foundry is coming along. It's been around for a while now. We're getting some pretty big drops in AI Foundry. So building platform for AI agents and agentic interactions. That's a big word. I'm sorry, and I'll apologize right now. So there's been a few changes. We've got a few more models that are coming in over the last month, and the integration into GitHub Copilot VS Code is coming along with all guns. So you can see here we've got Grok, Flux, Pro, Hugging Face. So there's been a whole bunch of work in the fine tuning. And Model Router, which allows you to auto pick the best LLM. So that's a pretty cool thing. You know, some of these LLMs have got pricier price tags than others, and sometimes you don't need the full deep thinking. Sometimes you can get the job done with a little less, and the Model Router allows you to do that, which is pretty cool. There's a fancy sort of picture going on there. So we've got multi-agent workflows through MCP, and I'm not going to spoil any of tonight's presentation, so I won't go too deep into that. But we've now got interactions into Logic App, and there's now Entra ID for AIs, which is pretty cool. So it's starting to see some of that security come through into the AI workplace. And I already talked about that one. Some of the things that caught my eye was we'll talk about Azure SQL. So Azure SQL now supports vector searching. It's got a vector type in it as well. So it may not be the best, you know, kind of SQL seems to be like the Swiss Army knife. So if you're building applications and you're already using SQL, rather than spinning up an alternative, if you need the use to store a little bit of embeddings or something like that in a data store, rather than spinning up AI search or something else, there's now the option to use Azure SQL or SQL 2025. But there's also AI integration in SQL Server, so you can now register your connections to your models. And so if you're going to do the embedding generation and all of that sort of stuff, we can now do that natively in SQL Server with TSQL, which is pretty cool. So you can see there that diagram. It's sort of like generating the embeddings, storing them, and then using disk ANN for a more optimized vector search than the traditional indexes that are created in SQL Server. That's pretty cool. So also the same sort of thing. Well, it's not the same. It's a little bit different in Cosmos, but we're getting the same vector search capability in Cosmos. It's just a little bit different. You can do now hybrid searches, which are doing the traditional, but mixed with a bit of a vector as well. And you've got some of the other technology that's built in there, that disk ANN. And you can see there's just like a bit of a demonstration of like some of the latency improvements you can expect, which is pretty cool. AI search, I was just talking about that just before. So it's now got agentic retrieval built into it. So it can actually take your query, pull it apart, send it off to agents to actually do the query in parallel. So it's a little bit smarter than it used to be, which is pretty cool. Azure functions. So this is there's a whole bunch of changes from build, right? This is just my pick. This one here looks really cool. I don't know. Happily or unhappily, this is tied to functions only. So you have to use functions, and it's a durable functions to use this task scheduler. But in a lot of workplaces, you know, those scheduling task schedulers are all pretty crap, right? I know, I've experienced it in lots of places. They're rubbish. So this one here, it's a fully baked solution. It's tied into the Azure portal. You get all of the native experience that you've got in the portal, and you can now trigger orchestrations. It's not just a task scheduler, it's an orchestration manager as well. And it's really easy to use. The code is actually pretty simple to write, and it just uses a couple of attributes to hook into this task scheduler, and away you go. So it's actually really easy, and it was kind of like, I think that's my number one. I mean, I know there's all this AI stuff, but this one here was just like a practical hole that a lot of people seem to have in their organization that I thought was really cool. Didn't get the hype that I think it deserved, but anyway, it's just my opinion. Azure Functions, MCP. So I won't go too far. You're talking about Azure Functions tonight?
Yes, a bit.
A bit, okay. I won't go too far into it, but so there are a whole bunch of libraries you can use in .NET Core and all that sort of stuff to connect into MCP. That's great. This takes a lot of that hard work out for you because it's using those pre-baked in libraries in Azure Functions. You don't need to worry about a whole bunch of the plumbing in .NET Core. Makes it a little bit easier. You can just connect using attributes and away you go. So it's pretty cool. And it just gives you that, what's the right word? Lighter entry to using some of this technology. So less effort, makes it a little bit easier. This here was pretty cool. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm now nerding out. It's like, Azure's great, right? And some people are shaking their head at this. That's great. But service groups, it just gives you an alternate hierarchy that you can start managing your resources in Azure with, which is pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool because, you know, there's a lot of teams in your organization that struggle with that predefined hierarchy that Azure sort of imposes. This allows you to now arbitrarily group resources. Doesn't matter what resource group, doesn't matter what subscription. You can now bring these up into a hierarchy grouping, and you can now provide access. Let's not get too far into it. So you can provide access to that, and people can see it through a different hierarchy. So if you're struggling with, you know, the mass of things in that, like, because once you actually start using Azure, you're going to have a lot of resources. You're going to have a lot of things. But if you have specific workloads, why are you shaking your head so much, Ray?
I went on the journey with subscriptions. It's the best way you can work out what you're building.
Well, now we've got a new one.
Yeah, the management groups came in and they're a little obscure. And you know,
throw all that out.
Why bother with tagging it?
Tagging's horrible. Don't get me started.
Infrastructure is code.
Yeah. We're all doing that. Bernie.
Yeah, so we just have a question in the chat about what the difference between service groups and management groups are, and can you use them both concurrently?
Yes, you can. That's the good news is yes, you can. So happy for Ray. It just gets a little bit more confusing for him. They're all usable in parallel. It's really just an alternate structure that you can build independent of the core management structure that Azure has. So think of it not as something that you're going to attach controls and policies and all of the stuff that you normally do. Think of it as something from a user experience perspective. We've got a set of users that want to look at this focused activity. Great, we'll build that up for you. And that's your view of the things that you're interested in. So it's not an alternate management, to Ray's point. It's not an alternate way to do the management that you're currently doing in management groups, and you know, you're putting your policies up in management groups and inheriting down into subscriptions and all that sort of stuff. It's not replacing any of that. That all stays. This is just a different lens that you can use to view the world. And maybe you don't want to see everything. Maybe you're only interested in databases. I don't know. I apologize if you're only interested in databases. That's sad for you. But anyway, that would work.
Yeah, I was just going to add as well. I think it's probably for a time. I think it's probably fair to say that for an application, most applications don't live in a single resource group, right? I think there's an acknowledgement of that. That then, the view of a resource group being an application, which is sort of how we tried to deliver it in terms of that was the model. The reality is, though, that customers don't deploy like that. It's not feasible for a lot of different reasons. And so this is a new way to sort of provide that view.
Yeah. So think more, if you're trying to create a domain, like if you're doing domain-oriented architecture and you want to have a domain that's broken down based on business terminology, this could be could be.
The other thing that leapt to my mind when I saw this was a lot of times, even though our best practices don't do this, the things on the left basically mirror your org chart. Who pays the bill, who does the whatever. Not necessarily that domain view that you're talking about. And I think that's where maybe this could be useful. I haven't used it yet. That's in my head. That's where I went.
It seems like a lot of opportunity in this. I'm super interested. Who here has heard of network security perimeter? Okay. Not many. Oh, that's a takeaway. Have a look at that. That's something that's coming along. Very quiet and build. I was very disappointed. But
They've got to put AI in there. Network AI.
oh my god, kill me with the AI. But yeah, like if you have a look at that, and it's definitely not complete yet, but that is something that's coming at a rapid pace, and I'm not surprised because there's probably a lot of work to. I'm hoping it goes down to the next layer and goes to a resource group level, but it allows you to do networking without networks. So it's pretty cool. Anyway, that was my takeaways from Build. Anyone else have any other item on Build that they saw and they thought, oh, that's the best thing in the world? Nothing. Okay. That's what I thought too. All right, cool.
One thing there was a whole bunch of stuff that's been previewed for like 2 years that went GA.
Yeah,
right.
sneaky extra announcement. We've already talked
There's
about
stuff around APIM. Was it Logicaps on-prem or APIM game? There was just a whole bunch of stuff.
Edge.
Finally went GA after
yeah.
2 years.
Yeah, a lot of GA. Yeah. Kind of feel like it's just cheating. You're just getting another bite at the announcement, Sherry. But anyway. It's all right. Yeah, all right. So, without any further ado, there's a couple of resources here. So, we've got a Slack team, we've got a YouTube channel, there's some training recommendations, we've got some blogs that are pretty cool. And without any further ado, I think I'm going to hand it over. Awesome. So, welcome, Todd.
Switch metaphors with you. Oh, it's fine. You already switched my metaphor. That's very kind of you.
That was the AI.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you very much, Damien. So, hi. I'm going to have to keep switching like this, my review. So, for those that haven't met me, my name's Todd Whitehead. Until recently, I was here at Microsoft. I'm now somewhere that I can't tell you yet, which is really interesting. Until July, there's some restrictions on there, but I'm the Intelligent Apps and Cloud Lead for a new Microsoft partner that's starting up in July. With some other Microsoft or former Microsofty names that people will recognize. So, as Damien said, most of my sessions here start out as ideas late at night that seem quite reasonable in the, after a few glasses of wine in the dark of night, and all of a sudden I'm hanging off chandeliers, putting up Christmas lights from Stranger Things and doing all that kind of thing.
DevOps for Commodore 64.
DevOps for the Commodore 64. I'm an 80s child, much to my children's horror. But obviously, where's my? There we go. So we're here tonight, though, to talk about all these new things. So I'm obviously not going to have any opportunity to talk about retro and really cool things. So this wasn't the talk I was doing. I'd already booked in with Dan to do a different talk, and then something happened. I'd spent a lot of time on LinkedIn lately, and I don't know if anyone else has, but everyone was talking about MCP. Just absolutely insane, right? It was like a new JavaScript framework had been released. It was that voluminous, right, in terms of the things. And I looked at all these things and I couldn't tell what the heck it was, right? Lots of references to magic, things like that, particularly in the early days. MCP is insane, all these, what the hell is it? And then importantly, I'd see diagrams like this, right? Where we've got, MCPs talking to LLMs and all sorts of weird stuff. What the hell is this stuff? I thought, oh, look, I better learn some new stuff. I've got to get away from this retro thing. But it was kind of weird because I don't know who saw the original Tron. The original one, right? Yeah. Because does anyone remember what the bad guy in Tron was? He was MCP. He was the master control program. And I thought that's really weird that everyone's getting excited about Tron again. You notice I lied about not doing retro references. But this was the MCP, the red spinny thing. And I thought that's kind of weird. That can't be right. So I do what everyone does now. I've got out Copilot. I said, what the hell is MCP? And what did it say? Oh, you mean that thing from Tron? I went, yeah, that's what I thought. That's probably not it. Maybe I need to do a little bit more research. So really tonight's talk is about not going to get into super nitty gritty about MCP. We're going to go through what it is, what it does. But really this is about where the heck does it fit? Why should I care? Because whether it's LinkedIn or even at Build, where you would have seen MCP and Agentic mentioned a whole lot, I didn't see any sessions of Build which actually really did a good job of explaining why you should care. Where does this fit? Why do we need it? So that's kind of what this talk is about, as well as a little bit of the journey and thinking I went along, because depending on where you're at with Agentic AI or MCP, I'm kind of hoping that you can start at that point and go from there, rather than get right to the end and show you all this stuff and you not have a way to kind of get here. So that's kind of what we're going to do. So we're going to look at where are we now? Why do we need it? This Agentic AI thing, didn't that fix everything? Why do we now need MCP? We had Agentic AI. Then finally, we're going to get to MCP. And then we're going to have specifically on MCP on Azure and have a look at what that looks like. So it's a little kind of inception-y, but there was a lot of great sessions at the recent Build conference. And Agentic AI and AI was pretty much in all of the sessions and certainly in the keynotes. So I thought, okay, there must be some good content there. So I fired up Copilot and I thought, well, Copilot can help me, and said, show me a list of all the sessions, first of all, at Build. And it kind of did a great job. Hey, Build is packed with great things. True, but that's not what I asked you. I wanted a list. Show me the sessions. Okay, just list all the sessions for me. It listed some, and then it said, go to the website, you can find some more. Okay, that's kind of annoying. That's not what I wanted to do. So I said, okay, well, forget that. Just tell me how many there were around Agentic AI and blah, 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 blah. And it came back and said, I could create that table for you. I could. I'm just missing a few things. Okay, what I need is a complete list of the session titles, which is the thing you'll notice I asked it for first. I also need a breakdown. So basically, it told me what I already wanted to know. And I said, okay, fine. So what did I do? And it said, well, I kept persisting, kept trying to prod it, because, if your AI doesn't give you what you want, if you keep going, sometimes it goes, I get you. So it actually came out with a pretty good thought process about what you need to do. Go and download the session list. Go and do this, go and do that. And then give it to me and I'll tell you what you want to know. Okay, if I had that, I wouldn't need to ask you, but all right, let's do that. So I went over to the Build site. Did anyone build I love saying build. Did anyone build a build schedule for themselves of all the things? You can go in, it's your normal sort of eventy type thing. You can filter by different things. But nowhere on here can you actually download a list of the sessions. Nowhere on here can you even get it to display a list of the sessions. Right? You can page through some things, you can do some things. And that was the problem the AI was having. Because, if you think about what Copilot is, it's basically that RAG pattern, right? But it's RAG pattern that's also grounded in Bing data. So that's why it knows about build, even though the LLM probably wasn't trained when this site was up. So it's already doing some grounding, but it can't quite get there. So it turns out there is a way to download the list. I figured this out because, Copilot told me that was my job. And this was the point where I realized the AI just assigned me a task on the task board, and I don't remember signing up for it. But that was okay. We can actually, and I don't think I've got a screenshot. If you go and add a session to your backpack or your program, you can then export that. That sounds really good. I've only got to do that for 178 sessions. So that's what I did. I went and added every single little session to my backpack. And then, hey, I can actually download the darn document that I wanted in the first place. Right? And it produces, of course, I did want to call this out. I got excited because when I got to this screen, I realized there was an AI agent in the build scheduler. I asked it, can you give me a list of the sessions? Hands up what it replied with. If you could go and download a list and give it to me, I can absolutely do that for you. Anyway, so it then produces a wonderfully formatted Word document in unstructured kind of style. Basically what I wanted. In Copilot, I could then come in and attach that Word document and ask it the questions and get the answers. It was just that simple. So obviously there's a problem. There's a disconnect here somewhere. And once I did that, I could then ask other questions, like go and add, a count of this and a count of that. We can do all that because now it's got the data. But I had to go and do the work, which kind of didn't seem like the idea of AI. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is I'm living in this kind of land, and I feel bad, I'm not pointing out to you. I'm living in this kind of land, right? I'm interacting with Copilot. Copilot's grounded in Bing, and then it's talking to LLMs, and it's doing all the stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it might be a little bit hard to see, so you might need to call those words out.
Oh, sorry. So Copilot, that's where obviously we're interacting. That's our AI host, our application. Bing, it's getting grounded data from there, so it's not restricted just to what the LLM knows about. And then obviously it's using the LLM to do its text generation. And the other problem is, over here, completely separate, we've got our conference website. Now, I have no idea this is true, but I don't think it seems unreasonable that that website is calling an API, which is talking to a database to get its session data, right? We've got that. We've been doing that pattern for 20 years. But the problem is we've got this gap, right? And if this website published a great big static list of all its things, Bing could probably have found that and answered some of those questions for me. But most of our apps don't work that way, right? We're not building our apps around our corporate or whatever data to generate big lists for search engines to come along and crawl, right? We're building apps that we expect people to interact with, right? So we have UIs and functions and session lists and export functions and things like that. And I'm pretty sure, for example, for the build, you'd have to be logged in to even get to that. So the LLMs or the AI is not going to have any way to do that because it's not registered for build. So that's a problem. All right. So effectively, what I want you to start thinking about is this whole thingy here of APIs and websites. It's really exposing two different things. It's exposing resources. So think of that as the data, the session information, all that kind of thing. And it's also exposing a whole lot of tools, adding things to my session list, exporting. They're all tools, all things we want to do. Okay. The problem is to join that world, we needed Tron Todd to come along and actually get those worlds working together, right? And that's the problem. Because once we did have Tron Todd, he could come along, export that file, which was then Copilot would pass up to the LLM in its grounding data, and hey presto, we got the answer we need. But we really want to move away from having Tron Todd. Probably not going to say that too many more times, but it does bring me a lot of happiness, I'm not going to lie. Right? Really, this is what, here we're talking about RAG. Really, this is kind of the promise of Agentic AI, right? We want Agentic AI is really about these things, right? Giving it a broad goal, but it's going to go and actually do some planning, think about the steps, think about the right tool for the job and do that for me so I can have the nut off. So that's kind of that transition from kind of our basic RAG to Agentic AI, right? The other interesting thing is I found I went through this, and I'll talk about it later, is that it doesn't mean Agentic replaces RAG, right? Because I was doing some things later on, I'll show you, where the super duper Agentic stuff in GitHub and Copilot could not handle it because it wasn't designed to, right? Whereas particularly around, say, that Word document we got, if you put a Word document and into in VS Code into Copilot, it'll go, Word, dude, that's not me. It just won't even look at it, right? That's not what it's designed to do, and it's got to, I look at code and I do code things. Whereas I pop that into Copilot, which is designed around, Word and documents and enterprise and all the stuff we've had for forever. It goes, yeah, no problem, I can use that. Right. So even though we're talking about these different phases, I in my head, they don't replace each other, right? This is a spectrum of tools we're going to use, right? And that becomes important for things like MCP, where we've actually got different types of tools that are going to want to plug into things and use things. And the easier we can make that, the more reusable, the less work we have to do. So what we're going to use tonight, and I've done recordings just because a lot of this stuff is in preview, and it's a little interesting to see how it works. So to make it more reliable, I've gone here. So for the rest of the demos we're going to build out, I'm going to use VS Code as my host application, right? We're going to think about these environments. So Copilot might be another one, but VS Code plus Copilot, plus GitHub Copilot, effectively is going to be our agent operating system environment we're going to use, right? Who's used the GitHub Copilot? Most people, awesome. How many have used GitHub Copilot, the agent version? Most people. Okay. I'm gonna have to look this other way. Now, let me come back and start that again. So what we're going to do is just quickly, just to highlight the difference between Copilot, what used to be called Copilot Chat. Now I think it's Ask. I noticed that. The heck? Oh, Chat. Okay. So that, which is effectively the RAG pattern, right? Again, the RAG pattern where it's looking at the context of your code, it's working out what's the most important, it's packaging that up with your prompt and sending it off to an LLM to get some kind of answer, right? That's what's now called Ask, which was called Chat. So we've got just a standard sort of web app here. What I'm going to do is go up to my little happy frog guy. It always looks like a frog to me. And you can see in the bottom there, it says Ask. That's the mode it's in. Okay, so I'm going to ask it some prompts. So again, this is doing the RAG pattern. Well, since the Ask guy down here. So in the background, it's doing kind of the same thing that Copilot was doing, the other Copilot. Okay, it's looking at my code, working out what I'm asking, getting some context. It goes, yeah, this looks kind of like the thing. But to actually action that, I need to take action, right? I inserted the cursor. I did record the sound, apparently. Goes through and does its thing. Okay. Now I've actually switched it to edit mode. Edit mode is kind of the same, but instead of expecting me to be in the loop, it's actually going to run off and across multiple files can make these changes, right? But what it is going to do is here, it's going to give me kind of a diff and say, hey, here's what I did. Are you happy with this? All right, so this is kind of almost that middle step of how we get to this stuff. So that's kind of cool, but that's we haven't got to the agent part now. We're going to do that now. There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to flip over. Now I'm going to put Copilot in agent mode. Right. So now this is that far more autonomous, and it's going to do those steps I wanted before. Right. I'm going to give it a goal, but it's going to go away and go, well, what are the steps? It's going to plan how to do that. It's going to look at the tools it's got to do that. Right. So I'm going to ask a very similar question. Hey, how could I improve this thing? Yeah, the sort of question you ask 100 times. In the ask one, it would give it to me in the context of like a file. In the edit, it would go over a couple of files and do a specific thing I asked it. But it's interesting, when you put it into agent mode, what you're going to see here, you get a couple of things. One, it takes an awful lot longer to run, right? The chat is very, very quick. Copilot agent is doing that. But the reason it's slow is doing that. It's analyzing the problem, it's doing the planning, it's looking at the tools, it's calling the tools, and the tool might not give it back what it expected, and it'll go, oh, that didn't work. I actually need to change that. So again, this is the difference with agentic AI, right? And the other interesting thing is you can actually see what it's doing. It's going to do that, and occasionally it'll stop and say, hey, I think this, if it's not certain or whatever, go, hey, this is my plan. Are you okay with this? Yes or no? Or it might, and I think it'll be seen here, it'll be things like it's going through some steps and there might be something it can't do, right? It might need you to go and log into something. It might need you, one of the examples I had when I did this, it went and told me that my Azure CLI was out of date. It basically said, hey, can't do that. That's out of date. Can you go and update it? But yeah, okay. And then it says, come back and tell me when you're done. I said, I'm done. Right, so it's really interesting and sometimes weird, the things it comes up with. And there's also things where even though it could do it, the way the agent has been built, it doesn't do it, right? It's kind of a safety thing. It's gone, oh, this is a big thing I'm going to do. Are you sure you're okay with this? So it'll check in with you as well, right? But it does a really, really good job, right? But it is that very, very different flow. When I get up to the end here, though, it's still working. You can see it's telling you all the things it's doing. But it's going to come up to a part here in a minute where I'm going to say to it something along the lines of, this looks great. I'm going to publish this to Azure. What Azure resources do I have? And you wouldn't believe what it's going to do. Remember what Copilot did? Here's the things you need to go and do and go and tell me what to do. Like, God damn it. Right? So here's basically where we end up. At some point, it's done all the things it can do. It's in code. It can do all that. But when I ask it questions about Azure, right, it gives me this really generic answer. Here's the places in Azure you could go and host this application. That's great, but that's actually not what I asked it for. What I asked was, what resources Azure do I have right now that I can deploy this? It had no way of knowing that. Again, there's that gap. Right? So if you think about, and its solution, of course, is Tron to go and do that and come back and tell it, and then it'll take the next steps. So how do we fix this? Well, the obvious solution is we build a new agent that can go in that environment and do it. Well, that's great. But as we can see, that would mean I'd have to go and do that for all sorts of things. All right. So what we can do instead, videos are not what it claims. Okay. You notice there's a little icon called Tools. And these are all the things that the Copilot agent has access to. And what's interesting is it isn't like one thing, right? There's one there called Get Problems. You know, the bottom, it's one of the tabs, which I thought was a weird tab. It's called Problems. And that's where it displays problems. There's the Terminal tab. There's all those little tabs. Each of those has a set of tools that the GitHub agent can use to go and do things, right? So when it's doing things like, look, you can get it to look at errors. So if you've gone into your terminal window at the bottom and said, .NET build, .NET run, whatever, and it gets an error, you can just say to Copilot, what's this error mean? Right? It has a set of tools to go and talk to that terminal window. It has all these different tools. So effectively, all we really want to do is add a whole new lot of tools that it can use to talk to Azure. That's kind of the idea. And that's really the problem that MCP is designed to solve. Because building an agent, talking to a thing, is pretty straightforward. It's not, it's not no big deal. But when we scale that, that starts to get interesting. All right, so let's think about this from a few different perspectives. Let's say I'm Azure or Atlassian or whatever. I'm a tool vendor, right? I want all these different people to use my tools and their AI, right? So the problem is there's lots of ways to build these AI agents, right? There's orchestrators like semantic kernel, autogen, all the kind of good stuff, right? LangChain. They all have this concept of plugging in external tools, and they're all different, right? So I would have to go along, and if I had Tool X come in and build a solution, an integration effectively, that would support all those things. There's also, if you look at these green boxes up here, we've got VS Code, Claude Desktop. These are the environments or the AI apps. Could be your AI app here, just whatever it is, doesn't have to be an IDE. but they all have different models for how to do plugins and extensions and whatever. So great. Now I've got to build one of those. So basically, it's that. There we go. Yeah. So if I'm building it for ALLM, and if I'm writing, for example, an Azure tool set and plug into these agents, that's not too bad. But then I've got to come along, and it starts to get really unpleasant. And that's only to build this Azure agent, and I've got to build all these other ones as well. All right. So it's all this bespoke integration that's painful and difficult, particularly when the speed of these frameworks and environments are changing. Absolutely not. And that's why I'm so excited about MCP. So again, it's not that hard to find ways to put retro references in. But it makes sense with the analogy, right? Because we used to do these things. See, I'm old enough, and I'm sure no one else in this room is. When you used to get a thing to plug into your computer thing, you had to find which thing to plug it into, and they were all different. And just because it looks like that, like if we see up here, for example, that one there, Ray, what's that one? No, that's a DB9 connection. In this case, yes, it's a serial port. It could be 20 other things that also happen to use a DB9 connection. And the thing up here, the PS2, believe it or not, Microsoft had their own mouse format called import. Guess what plug it used? That plug. It's not at all compatible. Right? So there was a lot of compatibility problems. And even once you did that, in the good old days, we would have to go in and actually configure up a whole lot more details, right? What interrupt does this hardware use? What DMA channel? Because if they conflict, people don't appreciate the horror of configuring in the dark past, right? Because, and that was kind of solved by this thing, right? USB. And we all know there for that USB-A connection, what's the odds you get it the right way around first time? Don't say 50% because it's never 50%. But you can plug anything into one of them. The software will probably work, right? So that's the analogy a lot of people have used for MCP. They're saying, hey, it's the USB for AI integration. And I think they're half right. What we actually need is this, USB-C. Because what's the odds you get USB-C in the right way the first time? 100%. Right. So I've added, this is a diagram I've seen a lot, and I've just crossed off this USB-A because that's obviously the devil's work. So we want something that always works. All these different services can plug into. But I don't know how much people know about USB-C because it has another special trick. Right. If you ever charge something with USB-C, it's actually a whole lot of stuff that goes on, right? The thing you plug it into goes, hey, how you going? There's a special pin where they can talk, right? It says, I'm good, how are you? Fabulous week. What do you need? Well, I need about this much power. And the thing goes, well, look, I can give you this much, this much, at this voltage, I can give you this much amps, this volt, and it gives you gives it a range of options, and they negotiate back and forth. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. Give me that. And then it switches over and starts delivering power. So it's not just about connectivity. They actually negotiate what they're going to do. And interestingly, it's not one way. So let's say you plugged it, you're charging off something, halfway, an hour later, the thing that was charging said, oh, yeah, I'm pretty good right now. How you going? The other end can go, actually, I'm a little low now. Can I get some power back? Yeah. And it'll start changing the other one. Right? So there's all this kind of chatter and whatever. And that's kind of what, to me, MCP is, as we see, right? It's going to give us a whole bunch of stuff, not just that you can plug into something, but they can do this discoverability and chatting and negotiating and sorting things out. So that's what the model context protocol. Instead of that other mishmash thing we had before, the idea here is all these different types of things, right? Whether they're the services down here, and these are providing those tools and those resources, or the app actually host applications, or the the orchestrating frameworks. If they talk MCP, you only need to build one one interface, and everything can talk to each other, and the world's perfect, right? No, but it's certainly a lot better than it was. So we'll dive into MCP just a little bit, and then we'll go and have a look at it in action. So speaking of retro, this cracked me up when I saw it. It uses a client-server architecture. That must make you happy, Ray, does it? Client server, the 90s, what a wonderful time. There's a few core concepts here, right? We have an MCP host, right? So that's the thing. In our demo before, that was VS Code, right? And VS Code plus, I guess, GitHub Copilot agent, right? So that's the thing that hosts all that. And then within that environment, we have a whole bunch of MCP clients. And these clients map one-to-one to the server we're going to call, right? So if we have server A, server B, server C, there'll be 3 different MCP clients that go with those things. Client server, right? It's just calling them. And these are pretty lightweight, don't get me wrong. These are very, very lightweight. And they talk a particular protocol, and then those things go off and do their thing, right? If it's a resource, it'll be, dealing with some data source. Whereas if it's more of a tool, it'll be connecting off to a service. That's the super high level. Doesn't sound that complicated. It actually does a little more than that. So here we've got our client and our server, and the client generally calls the server and does some things, but not only. Again, think of that USB. Once you've got a connection, the server can actually notify and call the client and say, hey, I want you to do something. Now, that might be like an event, like, oh, something's gone horribly wrong, or it might be something else, which we'll see in a minute. But yeah, so, and the good thing is parts of these are pretty familiar, right? So tools, functions we can call. You could think of that like what we used to think of like an API. So in our build, if we were building a MCP server for the build conference, we would have a tool that allows you to query and get what's in your session list. Here's a list of sessions, here's a list of speakers, all those kind of things. Pretty straightforward, right? We might also have resources. So resources are just literally that. It might be a database, it might be a file, it might be an image, whatever, right? Just a resource. Here's where it gets a little more interesting. These MCP servers can return prompts, right? So as you connect an MCP server, you can go, hey, here's a list of prompts that, the cool kids use when they call me that are going to give you good results. Right? And they can be static, so just a prompt, or they can be sort of a parameterized template. Hey, when people, if you're checking the weather, what are the things you need to know about? When, location, whatever. So it's going to give that back. Because remember that model, at the end of the day, all this is going to go into the context for the LLM to decide, what to do, and your agent can look at. So that's kind of interesting. This one is super interesting. Sampling. So sampling is the MCP server going to the client. Could you do me a favor? Could you go out to your LLM, run this prompt, and tell me what it said? Interesting. So potentially super powerful, also super scary, right? And we'll get to that. But so you can see here where, yeah, tools, resources make sense, but we're really trying to make that AI problem a much richer space, right? Where we've got interesting relationships. This is not just get me data, get me resources. These are going to be part of our flow, our orchestration. How do we secure that? How do we control that? How do we know what's going on? We'll see. Yes. So that's kind of the core parts of MCP. Does anyone see anything missing? Secure. So one of see this, and I'll point over here, sorry, as well. See this little, I probably didn't change that color, that little italics line there, right, is interesting because the MCP protocol has these assumptions or ideas about who should be owning and controlling each of these, right? So it's kind of interesting when you first read it. So for the tools, model controls, right? So it doesn't mean that the model's calling the tools, but when the intention of the protocol is when you pass up to it your user prompt, your grounded data, whatever, and you give it the list of tools that you have available, it's the LLM in theory that's going to go, hey, this looks like the right one. That doesn't mean your application can't veto that or apply a policy. But in a broad sense, that's who is intended to be using that to make decisions. Resources are more application control, right? Because they're the things that you want to get to do the certain things. This one I love. Prompts is user controlled. But we're building agentic AI. How the heck does the user control the prompt? So there's kind of this underlying assumption that the AI, oh, I haven't got it on here, but you know, the AI host, the thing that's providing, that's like, hey, you should go and ask the user about this to make sure this is okay. Okay, it's kind of interesting. Because remember when I talked about even forgetting all this, the GitHub agent was doing that itself too. When it got to a certain point, it would come and ask me things, go and do this, go and log into that, go and do that. And here's the one that, yeah, and sampling, that idea of go from the server, please call your LLM and come back, server controlled, this thing here, so not your application. So right, that's really interesting to think about. Now, if that's your server, for example, exposing some corporate tool you have, awesome, you've got control and visibility. What if that's the Azure server or the GitHub server or the insert your server here server? Atlassian, doesn't matter. That makes life a little interesting. But, you know, potentially super powerful. So the basic flow, just to go through here, let's get to make this kind of real. Got our MCP host, think VS Code, think your application. And then it's going to go off here. We're going to call the Azure MCP server, because luckily enough for me, there is an Azure MCP server. And Azure MCP server in this case is about interacting with Azure. We're not talking about yet hosting our own MCP servers. This is the thing that's going to answer that question, what Azure resources do I have, for example? Right? So the way this works is the client is going to send off to the LLM going, hey, Todd asked what Azure resources he has, and we'll have a system prompt and whatever else it have, but it's also going to send through, and here's the tools I know how to use, right? With a description and a whatever. The LLM is going to go, okay, that sounds pretty good. I think you should use this tool. Go and call this tool to do the thing. So the clients are going to go, cool, I'll go and call the thing. So it calls the Azure MCP server, which obviously then runs off to your Azure, put Azure there, but you know, your Azure Graph, whatever it happens to be that it needs to go, what source it needs to go. And it goes, yep, here's the results. And this is interesting too. The MCP server will not only return the result, but it'll also provide a list of what it used to actually go and do that itself. Right, so back at the client, we have a little bit of observability about what was called and how that worked. And we're done, super easy. So that's what we're going to go and have a look at now. We're going to have a look at how we set up the Azure MCP server in VS Code to kind of make some of these concepts super interesting. So the Azure MCP server can talk to a whole bunch of services, not all of them yet, but as well as, you know, what resources do I have and all these common ones. It's got specific tools it exposes around a lot of different services, right? So you can go, hey, when is this this certificate in Key Vault going to expire? What's the policy on that, right? It knows about specific things and services. So you can visualize that. I don't know what you do. I went Scott Hanselman. Scott Hanselman is there. We're going to plug him into VS Code and see how that goes. So how do we actually configure that? Now, obviously, this is completely different depending on what host you're using. Right, so I'm using VS Code here, so I'm going to show you how that does it. You know, Claude Desktop does it a different way, and your app would do it a different way. But this is basically the registering of these tools so that they can be passed through to that prompt up to the LLM. So there's a wonderfully descriptive setting, which I noticed they haven't updated, because remember when it was called chat, now it's called ask, but the setting is still called chat. You go on and go, okay, MCP is enabled for chat. You tick the little box. It tells you it's in preview. And do you want to do discovery and things like that. Pretty basic, just a little single setting. Interestingly, with these settings, you can store them against the user or the workspace. Right. So obviously, if you do it in the user, it only applies to you. So no one else will see them if they pull down the project. Whereas if you put them in the workspace, it actually creates a